Today's talk begins with a question. There's a lame man and a blind man. How are they ever going to go anywhere? One of them is lame, he can't walk. The other one is blind, he can't see. So how are these two people going to go anywhere?
L'enseignement d'aujourd'hui va commencer par une question. Il y a là une personne qui est paralysée, elle ne peut donc pas marcher. Et il y en a une deuxième qui est aveugle, elle ne voit pas. Comment serait-il possible que ces deux personnes se déplacent quelque part?
Is it possible? Yeah, if they help each other. It's true. How are they going to help each other? The man who can see has to get up on top of the shoulders of the blind person. And then he can direct from up above. He can direct where to go. And so in that way, the leg power comes from the man who's blind, and the seeing power comes from the person who has no leg power but can see. This is an analogy for our mind and body. Our body can't go anywhere without the mind. It won't move. It won't do anything without the mind telling it where to go. And the mind, on the other hand, has no physical form. How can it go anywhere? It relies on the body it relies on the body also. So these two, it's an analogy for how our mind and body are. So the body doesn't know anything at all. The mind knows. The body is what is known. So the yogi's job is to watch and to see, what are these two doing? What is the body doing? What is the mind doing? So we use the method of meditation to observe. And as it has been said many times, we make effort and aim to observe every arising object, beginning with the rising and the falling. So with effort and aim, the mindfulness becomes steadfast and concentration develops. So initially, the mind just tries to follow the movement. It stays with the movement, and although it doesn't know anything at that time, when the mind can stay with the object, the movement of the rising, the movement of the falling, the pain, the aches, whatever other phenomena happen, when the mind can stay with those, then it's not running anywhere else. So there's no greed arising, there's no anger arising. The mind is concentrated. So in that one moment, in just one moment of observation, in one moment of concentration, the mind being firmly on the object, just one moment is not very strong in itself. So we have to try to build the continuity. When this concentrated mind, this pure, clean, concentrated mind occurs one moment after another, the energy that it has becomes very strong. One moment is not very strong in itself, but when one moment of consciousness is followed by another moment that is of the same nature, then it becomes quite strong. And at that moment, there is the aiming quality that places the mind accurately on the object, just like the dart hitting the target. So the mind falls collectedly on the object that is arising. And this is momentary concentration. Moment by moment, object by object, this concentration is occurring. So it is called momentary concentration. We have to keep on doing this again and again and again. And when we do it enough times, then the factor I mentioned yesterday of vichara, the quality of sustained application of the mind on the object. First we have the initial application of the mind, which is the aiming factor, vitakka. And when this is strong enough, then vichara gets activated. The mind is sustained on the object as though it's rubbing against the object, and this brings knowledge. When the mind falls collectedly on the rising, then it knows qualities that are there, like stiffness, or tension, or whatever, movement. And when the mind falls collectedly on the falling, it knows movement or relaxation. When other objects are observed, also the mind falls collectedly on them and knows their true nature. So this is the knowledge that arises when the energy of the mind is strong. So as one continues to observe, one comes to perceive that in that moment of observing, there's the object that is known and the mind knowing it. Again and again, there's just the object that is known, the mind knowing it. Whether it's physical qualities that are known, of heat or cold or tightness, and the mind knowing these. Or a moment of anger and the mind knowing it. A moment of peace, the mind knowing it. One comes to understand that there are just two things happening. The object, in many cases, it's the physical object, and the mind knowing it. So once one starts to see the true qualities that are really there, one comes to see that there are just two components to our existence, mind and matter. And this is a necessary step in the development of our knowledge. We can't go further without this knowledge to see clearly that there are just these two things, mind and matter. In the moment of seeing, also, there's just mind and matter occurring. In the moment of seeing, there's the physical eye, there's the visible object, or light rays, that strike the eye, and there's the consciousness that arises when that happens, the knowing of the visible object. There's seeing that happens. And the seeing is mental. The physical parts are the eye base and the visible object. Together with seeing, knowing the visible object or seeing consciousness, there's also the sense of contact. The visible object and the mind meet, they come into contact on the eye base. And there's also the quality of feeling, good or bad. The contact is either a pleasant one or an unpleasant one. Although these five things are here at the moment of seeing, when seeing happens, we put our attention on the eye and note the seeing. The eye is the place where the seeing happens. So we put the attention there and just note seeing when we're seeing a visible object. When we note the seeing, we can become aware of any one of these parts that are involved. Sometimes the eye base will be apparent. Sometimes the feeling, the light rays will be what is apparent. Sometimes the knowing of the sight is what will be apparent. Sometimes the feeling. Sometimes the contact. But we just note it as a whole, putting the attention on the place where the seeing happens, which is the eye base, and noting the seeing as a whole. Just note seeing. It's the same way with hearing. Hearing happens when the sound strikes the ear. And at that time, hearing consciousness arises. If we have a healthy ear, and there's a sound striking the ear, then hearing consciousness will arise. Together with hearing consciousness, there's the sense of contact. the object and the sound and the mind meet at the ear, the physical base. And there's also a feeling, good or bad, or it can be neutral. If the sound is one we think is good, then there's a pleasant contact, a pleasant feeling. If the contact is with something disagreeable, then there's an unpleasant feeling, or there can be a neutral feeling. So in this too, there's mind and matter. The ear base and the sound are physical, and the consciousness, contact and feeling are mind. In the moment of smelling, it's similar. There's an odor that comes out through the air into the nostrils, and it contacts the nose. And at that moment, when we have a healthy nose, then smelling consciousness occurs. We know the smell. There's also contact and feeling, good or bad. It's similar with tasting. There's something tasteable object, and it comes into contact with the tongue. And at that time, there's knowing of the taste. Together with taste consciousness, knowing of the taste, there's the contact, the sense of the mind and the tasteable object meeting on the base, which is the tongue. And then there's also feeling, good, bad, or in some cases neutral. And with the body, it's similar. There's a tangible object, and the body base, the area of the body capable of receiving touch. So all over the body, wherever there's moisture, we can perceive the tangible object. We can feel something touching. The nails, the teeth, the hair, the parts of the body that are completely dry without moisture, they have no sensitivity to touch. But all the other parts of the body where there's moisture, one can feel contact with the tangible object. It can be internal contact or external contact with an external tangible object between the body and the external external tangible object, or it can be contact with internally. There can be some internal part of the body touching the body inside. In thinking and so on, other mental activities, it's similar, but a little bit different. And so for now, I will just say that the mind takes an object, can take a mental object. For example, anything that we heard or saw or experienced in the past, we can remember that. That can be the object of the mind. So the mind can know those mental objects. The mind can know images. It can know internal sounds. It can know all sorts of types of mental objects. And in this too, there are types of mind and matter occurring. So when we can see, so it's important to understand that these are the components of our experience. And I think this was mentioned earlier on a tape, but it probably is good to hear it again. So as we can continue to practice, once we see that there are these components, mental and physical components, to our experience, we start to see, as our concentration develops further, we start to see how these are related as cause and effect. And there are many, many types of causal relationships. We don't have to look for them. We just come to naturally know them as we observe the arising object. There's nothing that we need to think about at all. It's just a natural knowing that arises through observing the arising object time and again. So there are four categories, many examples. Mind can cause matter, and matter can cause mind. Matter can cause matter, and mind can cause mind. These are the four basic categories of causal relationship. So, mind causing matter. When we go from a sitting posture to a standing posture, or from a standing posture to a sitting posture, we can become aware. If we're aware of this process of standing up, from the very moment when we begin, we can be aware of the intention that brings about the movement. Sitting up, going from a sitting posture to a standing posture doesn't happen without intention. And when we observe closely, at the very beginning an action begins, these intentions start to show their face. Not only is there one intention, there's a whole series of intentions, followed by a whole series of movements that get us from the sitting posture into the standing posture. We don't have to search for these intentions. We just have to watch what we do very carefully to catch it right at the beginning. Matter also causes mind. And an example of this is seeing. In seeing, there's the physical causes are the eye base and the visible object. These are both physical. And because of the contact of the visible object with the eye, seeing consciousness comes about. Together with seeing consciousness, there's also the contact and feeling. And another example of matter causing mind is that when the abdomen rises, our noting mind goes to observe it. So the rising of the abdomen is physical, and the mind observing it is mental. When the abdomen falls, also, the mind notes it. So the physical cause of the falling of the abdomen causes the noting mind to observe it. And we can also say that when the abdomen doesn't rise, when there's no rising, then the noting mind will not arise to observe that. And then in that way, also we can say that matter is causing mind. Then there's matter causing matter. And one that is quite obvious in cold weather is that the cold weather outside makes our bodies cold. And if we then, becoming cold, there can be the desire to put on warm clothes. So in this case, the cold matter in our body causes the intention the desire to put on warm clothes. An example of how mind can cause mind is when the mind wanders and our mind notes it. So this is the second stage in our development of knowledge, and it's necessary for our knowledge to develop stage by stage. When one comes to see that there's only mind and matter, then one understands that there's nothing else inside our body. There's nothing else in there. So there's no self in this. There's just physical and mental. That's all we experience. And if we keep on looking, we see that's all there is. And in this way we overcome the view that there's an ego in here, there's a self. Of course, on the conceptual level, and there is. We do exist on the conceptual level. But on the ultimate level, there's no thing that we can point to inside of us that is a self. When one comes to understand the causal relationships of mind and matter, then one no longer thinks that things happen without a cause. Or one no longer attributes a kind of mistaken cause to how things happen. One clearly sees this causes that. And then one knows that it's nothing else that is ordering things to happen. It's just because the causes are present, the results occur. After one starts to perceive the causal relationships of mind and matter, one comes to see their common qualities. The matter and mind, every type of matter and every type of mind has its own individual quality. As mentioned, that, for example, the earth element has the quality of being hard or soft. The water element has qualities such as flowing, solidity. The mind has the quality to know the object. Seeing consciousness has the quality of knowing the visible object, and so on. As we observe these qualities, heat, cold, warmth, stiffness, tension, seeing, hearing, we see that they arise and they don't stay that way. They arise and then they pass away. So this is the first characteristic that all phenomena have in common. One comes to see that whatever it is that is observed, it arises and passes away. And one understanding this, one comes to understand intuitively, not through analysis, not through logically thinking it out, that whatever arises and passes away cannot be considered good. It's inherently unsatisfactory. And it is doing this, arising and passing away, on its own. It has nothing that we can control. It is just phenomena that is arising and passing away, just process. So seeing these three characteristics is what is called the beginning of Vipassana knowledge. So now I would like to tell a story about a young monk, and I hope that you will all be inspired. One time, in the time of the Buddha, there was a very wealthy family, and they had a daughter, the heiress to their fortune. She ran away with her servant, and then she had 2 children. After that, she wanted to go back to her parents, and she and her husband went to her parents. They thought, if we bring the children, they'll feel loving towards us and they'll forgive us. So they went back to the mansion with the 2 sons, the 2 young sons. But the parents didn't want the daughter to come back. They said, you can leave your sons with us, but you go live with your husband. So she did that. And the sons, the 2 sons, which were named Mahapantaka and Julapantaka, they were raised by their grandfather. And the grandfather used to go to hear the Buddha's sermons, and he would bring the eldest son, Mahapantaka. Now, these 2 grandsons, were not his sons, and people used to ask him all the time, whose children are these? And it was very embarrassing for him to have to answer this question all the time. So when the elder son, listening to the sermon of the Buddha, said, I want to ordain, he said, please, go ahead. So he gave the young man a very nice ordination ceremony, and the young man ordained, he became a monk, and he also became an arahant, completely enlightened. And the younger boy, he wanted to follow his older brother, so he also went to the monastery and ordained. So first he was a novice, and then he became a monk when he was old enough. So a monk has to be at least 19 years and 5 months. That's considered, he's supposed to be 20 years old, and 19 years and 5 months is old enough to be a monk. So when the younger boy, Julapantaka, became a monk, because of his bad karma, he became very stupid. And his brother tried to teach him to memorize a verse. It was only 4 lines long, and he couldn't do it. He would memorize 1 line. He would get it. He would try to memorize the 2nd line of the poem, and the 1st line would disappear. So if he took 4 months, the whole 4 months, he could not memorize a 4-line poem. So his brother the elder brother was, although he was an arahant, so he did not have any bad intention, but he felt that a person who is that stupid should not be part of the Sangha. So he told his younger brother that he should leave. And his brother was very hurt. And although he was hurt, he didn't leave the order yet. But one day, all the monks were invited to go out to the home of the man who sponsored that monastery. And it happened that the elder Mahapantaka was the one in charge of invitations. So when the donor went to him and said, "I'd like to invite all the monks, how many monks are there?" He said, "There are almost 500, not quite 500, because there's one who's really stupid, and he can't go." So the younger brother heard this, and he was very hurt, and he decided to leave. So he was on his way to the gate of the monastery, and of course he ran into the Buddha. The Buddha was there. So the Buddha asked him, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Oh Buddha, I'm leaving. My brother told me I can't be a monk anymore. I'm not worthy of the Sangha." So the Buddha asked him, "Whose Sangha is it? Whose order of monks is it? Is it your brother's order of monks? Or is it my order of monks?" So Chulapantaka replied, "Oh, Lord Buddha, it's your Sangha, not my brother's Sangha." And so the Buddha said to him, "In that case, do you need to leave?" And so he decided that he could stay. So the Buddha he taught him how to meditate. He gave him a piece of very fine white cloth, a piece of white silk. And he told him to stand in the sun and rub it. And as you rub it, to repeat to yourself, "It becomes dirty, it becomes dirty." In Pali, Rajoharanan, Rajoharanan. And so Chulapantaka did that. He stood in the sun, rubbing this fine piece of white silk, standing in the sun, repeating, "It becomes dirty, it becomes dirty." So as he rubbed the cloth like that, he became to be aware of touching. There's touching. He saw the cloth. What happened first was that the cloth became very dirty. With his sweat. He sweated and the cloth became dirty. And that somehow, it helped his mind start to become open. And he perceived that there's touching happening. And after he became aware of the touching, he became aware of knowing the touching. So he could observe that there are these things happening, touching and knowing of the touching and knowing it. And as he continued to observe, he saw the touching disappeared, the knowing of it disappeared. These things were coming and going, coming and going. So as he perceived directly the arising and passing away of the touching, the arising and passing away of the knowing of it, his Vipassana knowledge developed until he became an arahant, and he had special knowledge as well. So not only did he ceased to be stupid, and he also gained liberation. This is a story to encourage the yogis, because this young monk he just diligently followed what the Buddha told him to do. This very simple thing of just rubbing a piece of cloth. but with that, his knowledge could arise. It had happened that in his previous lifetime he had been a king who had worn very fine clothes out in the sun one day, and seeing them become soiled with his sweat, he felt an urgency about the fragility of life. And this meditation subject that the Buddha gave him awoke that spiritual memory, and he was able to develop knowledge through that meditation subject. So I hope that all the yogis will be able to apply the practice and gain peace and liberation in this very life.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.